We're going to be talking about resolutions. And I'm Chetali, and I work as a coach with Wysa. So, we're coming to the close of the end of this year, and it's a good time to generally take stock of everything that's gone down so far. What has your year been like, and what do you want to do next? What are you thinking of doing next? What are you trying to plan for yourself next? And resolutions is something that we're all familiar with, right? We all know. We all know what resolutions are generally composed of. A lot of people try to plan around their fitness. A lot of people try to plan regarding the relationships in their life. Some want to plan about spending more time with their family, or some professional goals, some work-related goals. So I think I broadly maybe just wanted to start by talking about why do we make resolutions in the first place. So for a lot of people, it's a way, I think, of getting a sense of the bigger picture of what their coming year is going to look like, or what they want to do then. But I think within those resolutions, what ends up happening is that because this word resolution is something that's so common and something that everyone's talking about towards the end of the year, we often get really influenced by what other people are thinking about when it comes to their resolutions, or how are other people planning their own resolutions. And it's difficult for us to spend time reflecting or thinking about what are the kind of goals that we want to plan for ourselves. And that requires a certain amount of time. And also trying to figure out goals that are achievable, goals that we would actually manage to achieve in the course of the year. Because the other most common thing about resolutions tends to be that we forget our resolutions really quickly, and most of us don't really end up completing these resolutions, right? So come to the end of 2019, and you may have the very same goals that you had at the start of 2019. So what do we do in order to prevent that? So I wanted to spend some time maybe talking to you guys today a little bit about that. Okay, I'm just gonna quickly say hi again, because we are now live on Instagram as well. And just quickly doing a quick recap of what I've said so far. We're primarily going to be talking about resolutions today, and generally going to discuss what are resolutions like, what are resolutions composed of, and yeah, and and what would be the kind of resolutions that you would want for the coming year. So generally wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about that, and also what would be the best way in which a resolution or a promise that we made to ourselves right now at the end of 2018 would be something that we actually end up completing by the end of this year. Something that's achievable, something that's concrete, something that you actually believe in, something that is a composite of the kind of reflections that you have from the end of this year. So maybe we should start with a conversation about what should be the kind of reflections that we should have at the end of 2018, right, in order to be able to make a goal for 2019. So have all of you spent some time thinking about is there anything that you would want to achieve in your fitness? Is there something that you would want to achieve in your professional development? Is there something that you would want to further achieve in your education? And and I think maybe just getting down to the fundamental basics of any sort of promise that we make to ourselves is about what could we do for ourselves further that perhaps would add to our sense of peace, or would add to our sense of happiness and contentment in life. So is there anything like that we would want to do in 2019 that would make us more satisfied with our sense of being, or who we are as human beings? And those are good questions to think about, I think, generally on a day to day basis. But this seems like a great time in order to just figure out a plan of action about what we want to do with these questions, right? These questions are often so philosophical that they remain within our diaries, they remain within our thoughts, but we don't really know what to do with them next. So yeah, so so a lot of people usually write down in their resolutions that, okay, I want to lose 5 kgs, or I want to maybe spend more time on self development, or I really want to get that promotion so bad. that I've been wanting for a year. So, yeah, so what are the kind of things that we could do to make sure that those things also get concretized? So, this is something that we often end up exploring with a lot of our service users, with a lot of our clients, that a lot of them come to us with goals and with aspirations, and sometimes with certain things that are distressing them. And one of the main things that we do as coaches with them is to often make sure that anything that they're talking about or that they want to achieve in the near future is something that's broken down into manageable chunks. So, how to make sure that the larger picture doesn't seem so large that it gets overwhelming, and you don't know how to achieve it, or you don't know how to actually go about this really large and massive goal that you have in mind. So, so yeah, so in resolutions, for example, I think, like something that I am thinking for the coming years, that I want to spend more time on my self care, and that's something that I've had in mind for a while for myself. So yesterday I was sitting and I was writing down in my own diary about what I wanted to do for my own self care, and I wrote down a couple of things about just maybe like journaling more regularly, or making sure that I do go for that run in the morning that I always talk about later, but I don't actually end up going for it. And yeah, and I just wrote down like an achievable goal, that because I know I don't do this every day, so maybe if I could start by doing this 4 out of 7 times a week, that would be a victory for me. And then maybe by February I could try to bring it up to a 5 out of 7 times, or and eventually maybe by March I could really push myself to getting to that 7 out of 7. And yeah, and that is a good way of making sure that that goal doesn't seem really scary, but it is something where I'm moving forward with the goal. So yeah, anyway, we're also getting some questions on YouTube, so I'm just going to quickly go through some of those and just see if there's something that we can keep answering here as well. So yeah, so okay, so we have one question where one of our viewers is asking us that how realistic and specific should you make your goals, or does it depend on how much you get overwhelmed? Hmm. I think uh, I think it's generally a good idea to have a realistic and specific goal in order to just make sure that we're going through with it. Because I think with abstract goals, there's a higher chance that they remain merely an idea and we don't end up following through on them. But yeah, but I think and everyone gets overwhelmed to a certain degree, right? So I think when you use the word overwhelmed, like I'm wondering if I should get into if that person is feeling distressed by their goal or not distressed by their goal. But I think in either scenario, regardless of if you're feeling overwhelmed or not, like a realistic and specific goal is just a great way of making sure that you're making some actual progress on it. um yeah, okay. And okay, and then someone else has asked us that how to make sure that you are sticking to your goal. So apart from what I've already spoken about concretization, I think the other way is to make sure that you have some check-ins for yourself. That there are some ways in which, whether it's something that you've written on a specific day in your diary, or you've asked your partner or your close people to maybe check in and say that I want you to check in maybe at the end of January and see if I'm actually following through on this, or another way could be that. Mm, yeah, and apart from, I think, yeah, a support system is a great way of making sure that there's someone reinforcing that idea for you, or or you have it noted down on a calendar or a diary, so that there's something that's constantly reminding you of it. For some people, it's a symbol or an image or a totem, something that yeah, that always reminds them. Like like some people stick a picture of self-care, like a lot of therapists stick a picture that reminds them of self-care whenever they open their fridge or whenever they go back inside their house, so that they remember that that's something that they need to do for themselves every single time. And okay, then another question that's coming to us is that how do you even make a goal? I never know what to do for my resolution, which is a really interesting question. I think a good way to maybe just think about what your goals should be is two ways, right? One is what are things that you wanted to do in 2018 and maybe you never got around to doing it and you really want to. And that's something that you want to keep in mind for the coming year. Then the other thing may be perhaps more abstract ideas, things that give you a sense of peace, things that make you happy. But again, you either didn't have the time or you just, you couldn't allocate enough space for it in your life, or something that's aspirational, but you really want to get around to doing it. And you really want to make sure that this is the year to do it. That perhaps may be another way of going about it. And what else? And how many goals is too many is another question. I think, yeah, another super relevant question. I think something that another viewer of ours asked is about, this idea of getting overwhelmed. I think that definitely can happen if we get so excited about our resolution list right now and make like 15 or 20, 25 goals. And that I think can get pretty overwhelming because if you just put down so many goals, A, you don't know where to start from, and B, there are so many things that you want to focus on that it just feels easier to give up on the goal list altogether, as opposed to completing the simpler goals that you've set for yourself. So I think it might be a good idea to just have like a smaller list to start with, especially if it's the first time that you're setting resolutions for yourself. So maybe 3 goals or 5 goals, but a really vast list, I think I would uh, mildly discourage someone from making something like that. I think that may not be the best way to start with. But all right. And okay, we have another interesting question that between our own targets and targets decided by family, which one is the best for our life or which one is more important? Okay. It's interesting because right before this live, I was thinking about the fact that, how so many of the goals that we decide, so many of the things we decide are decided by like a social context of sorts. That what are our friends thinking, what are our families thinking, what are the kind of goals that they have in mind for us, like especially I think in India, so many things start revolving around the social clock, whether it's about marriage, whether it's about having children, having your career sorted and stable by a particular time in life. I think the career thing at least is perhaps more global. But yeah, but I think it's a good time to also reflect where are things where you perhaps have a different perspective on life than people who are close to you, and things for which you want to take a stance. There may also be things that you're undecided about, and you may not be sure if that's something you want. Maybe your family is really keen on it, but I think along with resolutions and promises that we make to ourselves, it's also a good time to have conversations with people about why they feel really strongly about your life, in certain ways. So sometimes people show their love or affection to us by stating that this is something that I really want, or this is something that I really want you to do in your life. But I think it's a good idea to generally understand where they're coming from, and that perhaps is a good place to get started, as opposed to be really convinced that that's something that I want to do, or I should follow through with what my family is saying, or completely negate what my family is saying. I think instead of either of those options, maybe it's just a good idea to start with a conversation, and that perhaps is as important as making a list of promises for yourself for the year. So, yeah, I think along with this conversation or this live about resolutions, I think this entire live is also about just this time of the year, right? And about taking stock of where you are in life right now. And that I think is something that's really relevant, and something that it's a really good question to think about, and a good way to wrap up the year for ourselves. So, someone else has asked here that are you in favor of resolutions? And I think I have had a really hard time sticking to resolutions myself, because I think I have often struggled to concretize these resolutions in the past. I have gotten a little better about it over the years, but usually. they would be more aspirational as lists rather than to-do lists that I would want to actually stick through and achieve. So, because of which I have a mixed feeling about resolutions. But I think largely they're a good way of just having a vision for what I want to do. I think that's how it helped me. But I think for a lot of people, it helps them much, much more if they just, yeah, have a much clearer idea of the resolutions, which I think I am still learning to do. So, okay, and there's another really good question coming through where someone's asked us that how can we help keep ourselves motivated through the harder parts of achieving our goals? Uh, so I have some fairly generic opinions to offer to that. That I think usually, whenever someone says that there's a harder aspect of the goal, and that's something that's, that's where I get stuck or that's where I lose motivation. I think one way definitely of going about it is to see if you can do some harder parts of those goals along with the easier parts or do them first before the easier part. But this varies with the goal. Sometimes the easier part of a particular goal maybe first, and then as a particular task or a particular goal is increasing in difficulty, that's when things start getting really complicated and we start losing energy or motivation. And a good way to, I think, keep motivating yourself through all of that is to just make sure that you're recording your own progress, and you're making sure that you're reminding yourself of the amount of effort that you've already put in, right? So I think all of us end up being fantastic critics of ourselves, but we don't. We're not often cheerleaders in our own lives, and it's a really good idea to make sure that we're doing that, because if we're affirming our efforts enough, then it's easier to keep doing a lot of these things and keep moving forward in a lot of these actions. So yeah, okay. And okay, and someone else has asked us that how do we remember resolutions? How do we go about that? So yeah, again, I think some of the things that have worked for me so far is that either you have a tangible symbol or something where you've written it in a place where you always see it, whether it's on your wall, whether it's on your calendar, whether it's on your phone. Those are good ways of going about it. Otherwise, letting people who are close to you know about something that you feel really strongly about and want to work through. So, one of my closest friends, she is someone who shares all her goals with me, and I know that even if I don't remember my own goal, her goal is something that I will keep pushing on or pushing for, and that's something that really helps, And she makes sure that she keeps checking in on me. So sometimes I think even when we don't put in that much effort in our own goal motivation, we make sure we do that for people who are super close to us. So yeah, so I think sometimes that can be a good way to make sure that there's always some encouragement or some circle of encouragement around us, and it's a good way to remember the resolution as well. If at some point we're so busy that we're forgetting it. So, all right, and again, another amazing question that how do we forget our own past and focus on the present resolution? So, okay, that's a bigger question. I think it's definitely hard to forget things that have happened so far, and I think it's definitely not a one-off process where I can say that this is technique A, and if you follow through, then everything that's happened so far are things that you can just remove or let go. I think it's a process like anything else. If you spend time figuring out what are the things that are stuck within you, then as you keep processing that, it's a good way of figuring out what should be your present resolutions. And it's very possible that the things that you're resolving to do in the coming year, they may be connected to the things that you're also trying to leave behind, right? So for a lot of people, these may be related to relationships, this may be related to loss, this may be related to things that they regret in their life, things that they resent, and they wish that those things had never happened. And I think it's helpful that we acknowledge what has happened so far and that those are things that are equally important a part of us. And it's only because of that that we're making these current resolutions. So, in the absence of all the things that we want to forget, we can't make the resolutions or promises that we want to make ourselves to the future. So, instead of trying to forget what's happening so far, um, trying to find ways to acknowledge it might be a really important thing that we may need to do before moving on to a newer goal. Uh, someone's asking us that is it a computer that is talking to us? I'm assuming you're referring to our product. And well, yeah, I mean, partially we have a bot, which is the main product that you see when you open Wysa. So that's an AI bot, but you can also speak to a coach if you want to. And that's an actual live human being if you think that that's something that you want to speak to. And moving on to other questions. All right. And then there's someone who's asked us that what do you do when you feel like you have to choose between happiness and success? Wow, that's a really vast question. Um, yeah, okay. I guess I would want to ask this person that why do they think that their metric of success is something that's so disconnected from their idea of happiness, and why is it that the things that give them happiness are not related to their idea of success? So, so that I think is perhaps something that I would want to lob back to the person who's asked me this, because I think there's something missing. There's something that needs to be thought through here more. If our ideas of happiness or success are so deeply at war with each other, you know. So yeah, I think honestly that's the first thought that's coming to my head to this. But all right, and then the next question that's coming to us is that how do you know if a goal is too small or too big? Um, I think maybe trying to figure out if these are things that are achievable for us and how much time would they take to achieve. Do we have enough time to achieve them? So, say for example, someone decides that I want to make sure that like the main focus of my life right now is my fitness, and these are the things that I want to do for that. And if the way that that person tries to plan for this particular kind of fitness is something that interferes with their work life or interferes with the kind of time that they need to give to their family, their children, then it'll be a much harder goal to achieve. So that will be a goal that I would call too big, because it's a goal that they really want to achieve, but they haven't really planned for it in a way that it will not interfere with other really relevant portions of their life. So that I think is a goal that's too big. I think goals that perhaps eventually start feeling irrelevant to a person or don't really mean all that much would be a goal that I would perhaps call too small, because even if a person gives up on that goal, they're not really losing anything, or they don't feel like it added too much to their lives anyway in the first place. That perhaps is a goal, that would be so easy to give up on that it's not really a promise or a resolution to ourselves. It's just a list for the sake of being a list. So yeah, I think that perhaps would be my definition of this. Um, all right, and okay, and we're still trying to figure out. No, we're still trying to look at some more questions, and then another viewer has asked us that I feel like resolutions are just another way of setting myself to failure, even if they are attainable goals. Is that just laziness, or is it something deeper than that? I think it's completely understandable if if resolutions are something that have been hard for you to stick to in the past. I think a good question for you to ask yourself is if these are resolutions that are really meaningful to you, and if this is the best way in which you want to plan for the year ahead. For some people, resolutions is something that works for them, and it's a good way for them to envision what they want to do in the coming year. For some people, it's just, it's not something that they connect with as much. So at the end of the day, if there are certain kinds of promises that you think are really relevant to your life right now, is that the best way that it has worked out for you in the past? Is there another way that you can think about going through this? And and I think if you feel like making resolutions in the past has primarily felt like you're setting yourself up for failure again, then I think I would want to go back to what we've already spoken about, that just making them more achievable, or making them, breaking them down into meaningful chunks might be really helpful in how you're also evaluating yourself eventually. Because yeah, if you're making really big goals, then yeah, then I can understand how that can be really demotivating at the end of the year. So all right then, to that, someone else has asked us that is it better to have short term goals because they seem to be more achievable. Hmm, I think both kind of goals have their value, but maybe as resolutions, yeah, I think short term goals might be meaningful. But here, short term for me can also mean something like a 6 month or an 8 month goal. So I guess the definition of short term there is also can be called into question. But yeah, but I think it's also a good way to plan for things that might be more long term in life. So, for example, I personally have been thinking more about my personal development or my self care, as I mentioned. And a lot of the things that I might end up doing in 2019 for myself will be things that add up to a larger self, or to larger things that I want for my body or my health in the future, right? So there's a long term goal which is about my health. But there are short term goals about what I want to do in regards to my health. So I guess perhaps each kind of short term goal is also adding up in a larger jar, whether it's in relation to health or development, etc., etc. Mm, all right. Then, okay. And so, yes, I think that perhaps is broadly what we wanted to talk to you guys about resolution so far. But generally, I think what I really love about the idea of resolutions is just the concept of making a promise to ourselves, right? Like, no one else is going to evaluate you on this, or no one else is going to ask you questions about this. But it's a great time to just sit in silence, figure out how this year has been for you, what are things that you would want to change, what do you want to visualize for your future, and plan that for the coming year. You have 5, 6 more days in this coming year, taking stock of 365 days, that takes some time. And there may have been some things that you would also want to note down, because there have been really important achievements, really cool things that you may have done for yourself this year. And that's something that's equally relevant to note down, as much as noting down the things that you want to correct or you want to change about yourself. Because I think both therapists as well as any person in this world, right, we spend so much time focusing on the things we want to change or correct or make ourselves more perfect. But I think for a day, also be a cheerleader for yourself. Note down all the things that you got right. Note down all the things where you made someone really happy, and just figure out a way in which you want to keep doing some more of that in the near future. And maybe you want to do something else. You want to do something different. And those are really good questions, and those are really good ways in which you would want to maybe start off and start making a list of promises for yourself. And yeah, that pretty much is what we call a list of resolutions. So thanks for listening, and see you next Thursday. Happy New Year.